Hello everyone, my name is Stonesy Boy and welcome back to Stonesy Reads. This is only going to be 16 pages, and as such I want this to be the shortest video, not only on possibly maybe the channel, but also the shortest reading video for any future trivia or any future fun little games. As such, I started talking immediately instead of giving myself a second to think, or get my vocals ready, or drink. So yep, that is 24 seconds on the clock, and let's begin. Chapter 8. What a bargain. The terrified Outworlder threw their hands up and made a pitiful noise that was perhaps the least threatening thing that Crichton had ever heard. They kept their axe at the creature's throat, though, just in case, and shouted, "Who are you? What are you doing here? Tell me now." The Overworlder whimpered and said something in unintelligible tongue. As far as Crichton knew, no one had ever been able to talk to an Outworlder. But that didn't seem to stop his terrified person from trying. Crichton hadn't spent much time with the Overworlders before. All they knew about them was that it came in two kinds. The first were tremendously powerful people who rampaged across the nether, taking whatever they wanted and beating up anyone that got in their way. The Piglins understood these Overworlders. If the Piglins could be nearly as strong and amazing as such invaders, they would do the exact same thing. If anything, the Piglins are jealous, and if jealousy often sent them into a frothing rage. The second kind of Overworlders were weaklings who somehow managed to stumble through the portal and find themselves quickly overwhelmed by the nether's vicious mobs. Lots of times they never even saw a Piglin before they met their end. This one beneath Crichton's blade was nearly of the second type. Most of these weakling Overworlders didn't stick around long enough for anyone to know them. They either were beaten down within minutes or they fled. Maybe it was because the particular Overworlder seemed pathetic, or perhaps it was due to the fact Crichton had feared their own life not so long ago. But the Overworlder's plight moved them to pity it. More than pity, though. In the back of the Crichton's head, they wondered the Overworlder might be able to help them get out of this pit. Rather than steeling himself to put the end of the person, Crichton crawled off of their chest and spun around and back off a few feet. The advisor wasn't trusting, though. They still brandished their axe before them. If the Overworlder was shamming and trying to pick them, lowering the guard, they would be sorely disappointed. For their part, the Overworlder took a moment to try to recover the dignity, if they actually had any in the first place. Once they seemed to have control over themselves again, they sat up with their hands up, showing Crichton had intended them no harm. The advisor wasn't sure they believed them, but they were willing to give this situation a chance to see where it went. The Overworlder backed up a while, still on their rump still. They were still outside the reach of Crichton's axe. Even at the point, they made a huge show of being harmless, asking you permission to stand. Being magnanimous, perhaps a little more intimidating than usual, Crichton gestured to the head of the axe. It would be safe for the Overworlder to rise. The Overworlder glanced longingly over Crichton's shoulder, and the advisor saw the intruder had noticed they had intentionally put themselves between a stranger and the obsidian portal. The Piglin wasn't quite ready to let the intruder race off yet. Crichton pointed the axe at the Overworlder with purpose, and hoped that they could figure out what they wanted. "Give me what you got." The intruder gave Crichton nothing more than a confused look and a helpless shrug. They didn't understand at all. Instead, they pointed themselves and said something. Crichton cocked their head on one side, listening to them carefully. "Farnham," the Overworld said. "Farnham." "Farnham." Crichton realized that must be the Overworld's name. They pointed at their own chest with their free hand, never letting their axe lower to the moment. "Crichton." The Overworld mimicked the name, angling only slightly in an attempt. "Crichton." "Close enough," Crichton said. "Now, give me everything you got." The Overworlder, Farnham, Crichton corrected, shook their head, and was unable to understand anything else the advisor said. Crichton sighed with desperation. They didn't have the patience to teach this fool how to speak properly. They considered talking to him before and then and there, if only to keep things simple. But Crichton was tired and aching and didn't know exactly where they were. Now, how would they manage to get out of here? And how would they find some place safe to go if they actually pulled that off? Killing Farnham seemed to be a waste at the very least, and Crichton had a little left to them. They didn't feel like they should let anything go to waste. Frustrated, they sat down in front of the obsidian portal and glared at Farnham as daring the Overworlder to try to escape. And it was around the Strider came limping around the bend. Crichton saw it before Farnham did. They instantly wondered what the Overworlder would think of it. They hoped that Farnham wouldn't try to attack such a harmless beast, but if what happened, Crichton wasn't going to stop it. Let the Overworlder exhaust their strength on useless things. Crichton reached out with their axe and pointed it at the incoming Strider. It took Farnham a moment to figure out the gesture meant, but eventually they followed the line of sight of the weapon's handle indicated. The spot of the Strider coming for them. To Crichton's surprise, Farnham didn't scream or bolt in terror. Instead, they leaped up and down and clapped their hands in delight. Crichton didn't understand this reaction at all. They just gaped at the Overworld as they walked over to the Strider and attempted to introduce themselves to it. Oddly, the Strider seemed to respond in kind, just as curious about the stranger as it is to them. The two of them circled each other for a bit and grew closer in every rotation. Soon enough, the Overworlder realized that the Strider was pale and shivering, and let loose a wild exclamation of sympathy, something that was short supply in Piglin society. Farnham came over to Crichton. their eyes wide and pleading. Despite the language difference, it was hard to misinterpret that the Overworlder wanted. Kryn gestured the Strider and the axe, then Farnham, indicating the Overworlder would take possession of the Strider if they liked, even though the creature wasn't really Critten's to give away. Farnham particularly squealed with glee. They were so excited that Critten worried that they might burst. They spun about again and again until they were dizzy with delight. When they were done, they fell over, collapsed on the ground, and laughed themselves silly. The Strider approached to lean over the Overworld to see if they were dead, which let Farnham off laughing again. Once Farnham ran to recover their joyousness, they began rummaging through their pack. They got Critten's attention, and the advisors stood back and brandished their axe at the Overworlder, warning them not to try anything stupid. Farnham just put up their hands and smiled at Critten until the axe was lowered. Then they went right back to picking through their pack, although much more gingerly this time. A moment later, they produced something surprising and reached out to Critten with it. The advisor looked suspiciously at a glass flask filled with violet liquid stopped with a cork. They glared at it and shook their head. The Overworld sensed Critten's misgivings. To allay any fears the advisor might have, Farnham uncorked the flask and took a low sip of the fluid himself. After a quick swallow, they opened their mouth to let loose a dramatic ah of refreshment. Then they offered the flask to Critten again. Still suspicious, but feeling a little less cautious than normal, Critten accepted the flask from Farnham. They put it to their lips, watching the Overworlder's reaction for the entire time. Farnham didn't seem to like someone excited about tricking a foe into drinking a bottle of poison. Instead, they seemed entirely delighted. Critten took a sip of the vicious fluid, and then it went down slowly, but it tasted delicious. It felt like something wonderful sense of warmth that kept permit from them all with their fingertips under their toes. A moment later, Critten gulped down the whole thing without meaning to. It was so good, it made him feel incredible. Farnham gestured toward the bruises they had on their arm. Then they glanced down to see that they had disappeared. They were so surprised that they put down their axe so they could roll up a sleeve and get a better look at their arm. There was no longer any sign of injury on it at all. Critten gasped at the Overworlder. They had heard about potions of healing like this, but the ingredients were hard to come by in the Nether. Apparently that wasn't the case wherever Farnham was from. The advisor gazing up at the smiling Overworlder and realized that they had flinched toward attacking him. Even though they were completely vulnerable, Critten found it hard to believe. But in a gesture of goodwill on their own part, they lowered their axe and bowed their head to Farnham to say thanks. The Overworlder sighed in relief, and their smile grew even wider. Meanwhile, the Strider had become fascinated with the obsidian portal and walked within a couple feet of it, staring at it the entire time. Farnham moved to intercept the creature, unsure how it would be allowed to depart. But Critten gestured toward the swirling portal, asking them both to leave. Perhaps it was foolish of the advisor's part, but they didn't see anything good coming from Farnham getting mixed up in the troubles of the Nether. Critten couldn't defend them other Piglins and had nothing to trade with them now either. Better to send the Overworlder back home where the mobs would find a safe predations and places hostile mobs, and maybe they would return with more potions and other incredible things. In an effort to encourage that, Critten reached into their pack and produced a lot of warped fungus, something that advisor knew that Striders were fond of. They handed it over to the grunt, and the Overworld accepted it graciously. Farnham followed the Strider over the portal cautiously, clearly not wanting to give Critten the impression that they were trying to flee. The Overworld even gestured to the advisor to join them on the other side of the portal. For a moment, Critten considered going with the Overworlder, but that, from what they had been told, it was impossible for Piglins to survive in the Overworld. If that wasn't true, Critten felt sure that the Piglins would have invaded the place and conquering it long ago. Many Piglins misspoke such of great battles, and they all somehow skipped over both how the Piglins had gotten into such places and what might have what had driven them back. Instead, Critten simply waved goodbye to Farnham and wished them well. The advisor was determined to figure out a way out of the pit, but they didn't think Farnham would be much help to them in that regard. They didn't gonna have to manage it on their own. Farnham gave Critten a well, I tried shrug, and led the Strider through the obsidian portal. With a spin of purple energy swirling them, they were gone. Chapter 9. Celebration. As Farnham emerged back on the underworld with the Strider by his side, he was awed but had been far away, and the most amazing thing that had ever happened to him. He never in his entire life thought he would somehow wind up in the Nether from something he heard about. It was the last place he ever wanted to be. When he walked through the obsidian portal, he'd been despairing that he would find his way back to the overworld. Now, after braving the Nether and coming back with a creature even more blazing than an axolotl, a sense of determination watched over him. If he could survive that, and apparently even make a new friend while doing it, then he could certainly figure a way out of here. As he gazed around the place, though, he realized that no idea how, for the moment, despair threatened to overwhelm him again. Then the Strider nuzzled up next to him, knocking him out of his darkest thought. Even there, outside of the Nether, it seemed pale and shivering, but he didn't know what he could do to help that. Instead, he gave the creature a friendly scratch along its top and looked at the moment and enjoyed its company. Now, wild and found such a creature, it would be a hit of the zoo. if he could get both of it and himself back there. Farnham sat down and decided to go back to his pack and see what resources he had with him. Richard had insisted on putting the pack together for him, and Farnham had been all too happy to trust in his well-traveled pal's judgment. He tossed some favorite food and some other odds and ends in before they stared out, but otherwise he wasn't entirely sure what might be in it. He looked everything out a piece at a time and laid out in front of himself in the glow of the obsidian portal. He found a torch, always handy, especially in the dark, a set of flint and steel, which he apparently made a good use of, a bundle of food, still pretty full, a bottle of water, which he topped off in the river, a couple more potions of healing, just in case, a couple more buckets for capturing axolotls or other water-loving creatures, a bed, in which he hadn't bothered to use during his nap previous afternoon, an iron sword, which he didn't really know how to use that well, but Grinchard had given to him long ago, a crafting table, because hey, you never know what you might have to make yourself on a long trip, a wooden pickaxe. Farnham stared at the last item in shock. He knew for sure he hadn't put that in there. Micro must have slipped out of his pack at some point without telling him, maybe weeks ago. Otherwise, he would have objected for sure. After all, the thing he most was afraid of was a tunnel through the underworld. Micro wouldn't have seen it that way, though. As an experienced miner, she wouldn't understand how Farnham could possibly go off wandering in the wilderness without at least a cheap pickaxe on his back. For her, that would have been like going for a hike without boots. You could do it for sure, but why? Even touching the thing made Farnham shudder. He knew he didn't see another way out of here, not unless he could turn into a fish. Still, he was determined to exhaust every other possibility first. He reassembled his pack, leaving out the torch and the pickaxe. He gave the strider a bit of food, hoping to keep it too busy to wander off, and he lit the torch. Then he walked around the entire edge of the cavern, just to make sure he actually was trapped in there. Nothing would have pleased him more than finding another way out, at least one that was safe and dry. He did figure out that the river left the cavern, but he did so by flowing out under the surface of the water. After having nearly drowned going under one underworld waterfall, he didn't feel like attempting another particular fate again, especially not with the strider in tow. Now that the Farnham got a bit better look at the strider by torchlight, he realized that the creature had been hurt. He supposed he should have been noticing limping before, but he didn't, astonished by everything in the nether, including Crichton, who had seemed like they were going to kill them on the spot, but had slipped by him. He wasn't sure how the potion of healing might work on the strider. After all, it was the nether, and things seemed to work differently there. Of course, the potion had worked on Crichton, so maybe it would help after all. He decided to risk it. He gave the strider a sip of one remaining potion's healing. It seemed to perk the creature up. Throwing the caution out of the wind, Farnham fed the strider the rest of the bottle and chugged the entire thing down. Only a moment after the potion was gone, the strider was galloping around the island in the cavern as if it had never been hurt at all. The sight of it made Farnham laugh with joy. He hated to see animals suffer. He always tried to help them if he could. Once the drill began healed so well wore off, though, the strider came back with the Farnham and nuzzled up against him again. For a moment, Farnham flattered, and then he realized the creature was shivering. It must have been trying to get close to him to get warm. It was chilly in the cavern, much colder than it had been in the nether. Farnham realized that if he didn't get the strider up to the surface and warm it up soon, he would have to send it back to the nether for its own good. There was only one way he could make that happen. He hefted the pickaxe in his hand. He was pretty shoddy one. For just the emergency, he supposed. And he looked exactly like the emergency to him. If it broke, he'd be stuck down here. Maybe for good. But if he didn't try, the same thing would be true. No matter how much it scared him, he had to give it a shot. He walked over to the closest edge of the cavern, right next to the island. He started digging upward as fast as he could. Chapter 10. Through the Portal. Crichton sat and stared at the obsidian portal for a long time. They knew that they should have just leave it alone and go find a way out of the pit. The fact that there had been a strider down here, which now seemed like it had been uninjured until the advisor landed on it, implied that there might be some sort of escape. Besides, the one that they spent on staring at, of course, curiosity had always driven Crichton throughout their life. Other Piglins like to call Crichton smart, but the truth was the advisor was insatiably curious. They wanted to know everything about everything. To Crichton, knowledge was power. To most Piglins, muscle was power. But Crichton had seen the short change in that category. Knowledge was the only way they knew to get ahead. And the best part was that they could always find some more of it. Eventually, you couldn't get any stronger, but nothing could stop Crichton from learning more. Obsidian Portal represented the most incredible source of knowledge that Crichton had never encountered. They also seemed like the most dangerous. The overworld was reputed to be toxic to Piglins. As far as Crichton knew, they might die the moment they stepped through that swirling purple field. But really, there was only one way to find out. Eventually, Crichton got tired of trying to talk himself out of doing it and just gave in. They stood up, squared off against the portal, and willed himself to walk through it. The fact that their feet refused to move toward it surprised him. Korean hadn't realized that they were so attached to living, they'd taken a lot of risk earlier in life. They helped Bungus rise through the Piglin ranks. Apparently, they got too comfortable living in the Bastion. That was going to have to change. Korean forced his feet to move forward, grudging one step at a time, until their noses just inches away from the obsidian portal. The swirling purple filled the whole of the vision, so it seemed like there was nothing else in the entire world. As much as their body rebelled against moving forward, Korean forced it to lean forward, inch by inch, until the tip of their nose finally brushed up against the spinning field. And then they were somewhere else. Korean stumbled, nearly fell, and they appeared on the other side of the obsidian portal. But they managed to catch themselves before tumbling into the river beyond. It was a very sight that too much liquid made Kitten gasp, though, as they fell their knees to gawk at it. In the nether, liquid simply didn't exist. The potion of Farnham had fed the advisor, but the most liquid than any had ever seen in one place in their life. The idea that there could be so much of it, enough to fill an entire cavern like this, staggered Crichton. What an amazing world. To think that the Piglins might be able to come here and conquer even this single cavern. What would that mean to them? To be able to have such a liquid whenever they wanted. The thought made Crichton dizzy and began to curdle their stomach. They tried to stand up, and they possibly concluded there had been wild possibilities of this world making them feel ill. It was the world itself, or something lacking in it. This was the problem that Crichton had read about. The overworld was not meant for Piglins like them. If they didn't return to the nether soon, they would succumb to illness and might even die. As incredible as the place was, it wasn't worth Crichton's life. They turned around and headed back through the obsidian portal before it was too late. In the purple glow of the purple portal's field, though, Crichton saw something even more amazing in the water. Ancient markings. Images left there that seemed to tell a story of the Piglin invasion. Someone, at some long-forgotten point in time, had been there from the nether. Probably through the very same obsidian portal, and scratched some diagrams in the caverns in the series of high-footed pictures. The images covered the wall of the blocks in the other direction. Crichton couldn't take it all in at once. From the bits that they could see from where they stood, the images showed several similar figures, the Piglins perhaps, charging towards the landscape, attacking a strange collection of foes. Crichton could pick out at least 4 different types of defenders, including some that looked like skeletons that roamed the nether. Some of them all stood like lone hero, maybe an overworlder like Farnham, only far stronger, of course, holding aloft some sort of weapon and leading the defense. A large block in the prize that they were fighting over hung over the entire scene, radiating power. Was this the story of the mighty Piglin army that had once invaded the overworld, just as had been spoken in the Piglin legends? Crichton couldn't be sure. Did it tell what happened to those long ago Piglin warriors? Did it explain how they managed to invade the overworld without the poisonous environment taking the mill? The swirling questions made Crichton wonder if they might be able to put the answers to use. They didn't know. They bent over and threw up instead. They had to get out of there as soon as possible with the knowledge of this world, or the nether wouldn't be any good to them. Crichton staggered through the obsidian portal. This time, they plunged through without any hesitation whatsoever. As Crichton emerged into the nether, a relief washed over every inch from head to toe. The feeling of impending doom vanished, although the queasiness in their stomach remained. Exhausted by the experience, they lowered themselves to the floor of the pit, sprawled out across it, and simply focused on breathing air meant for their lungs until the awfulness of the whole experience began to leave them. The moment that Crichton felt better, they sat up and gave the obsidian portal a hard stare. The field inside it didn't respond at all. It just kept swirling like nothing had ever disturbed it. While the portal might not have been changed by experience Crichton had, they didn't care how sick a trip through the portal made them. They were going to go back through and decipher the Piglin message left on the wall, no matter what. As long as Crichton didn't stay on the other side for too long, it seemed like they could recover from such ventures. If they were careful about it, they could go back and forth between the 2 worlds as often as they liked. With little worry about other than temporarily tender belly, they vowed that they would continue to do this over and over until they managed to crack open the mysteries of the ancient images held. And then, armed with the incredible knowledge, they would figure out what just to do with that. Wow. What a very brave little guy, huh? Well, I hope he gets to whatever venture he wants to get. And, hey, we're going to figure out what it is. But that also tells us what this in the back of the book and the front of the book is. This is the spiralings on the wall, which is pretty cool to see, honestly. Anyways, to make this video as short as possible, I hope you guys have a super fantastic, wonderful day. Be polite, be efficient, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Next time we are reading page 78 to 100, and let's find out 100, because it's supposed to be 80 to 100, but we're doing it to 100, and, actually just 98. We're doing it to page 98 next time, which is 20 exactly, which is perfect. So, yep, hope you guys have a super fantastic, wonderful day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye!